This video is dedicated to the memory of John Trimble. Without him and his wife Bijo, Star Trek may well not exist as we know it today. Thank you for everything. Once again, we're bringing you a community suggestion from one of our commenters. This comment was on our Delta Flyer video from Christy SFM1234. Thank you for your suggestion. We've got a plethora of shuttles to cover today, so we're not going to make an entire breakdown on each, but rather the specs and the most notable appearance. Brevity is key here, people. For good measure of a man. Sorry, still the best TNG episode. Well, maybe Drumhead. I'm getting distracted. Let's chuck in the mission scout ship, shall we, from Star Trek Insurrection. That was suggested by Starbrand 3726. As there is very little footage to make an independent 15-minute video of that, so yay cake!
Get rid of the last bad guy, and then there's cake.
I'd also like to point out that this does not cover every single auxiliary vessel ever to have been featured. I'm thinking about worker bees here, drones, inspection pods, and the like. Just the embarked craft that was more widely used and seen in the original animated series, Next Generation, DS9, Voyager, and Enterprise. Don't want to be scratching any paint now.
Great. You scratch the paint.
Welcome to Trek Central, lords, ladies, and sovereigns. I'm your host, Lieutenant Commander Adam. And of course, before we warp into the video, if you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure you hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central. And you can also follow us on social media for daily updates on the Star Trek universe. As always, please let us know your thoughts in the comment section below, because just like this one, could end up as a video. And if you're talking about Star Trek, well, we want to hear about it anyway. Okay. Let's punch it. Ow! No, not me. Right, first and foremost, let's get some logistical nonsense out of the way, shall we? In starship classification, a shuttlecraft, or shuttle for short, was a type of auxiliary space vessel typically attached to a starship or starbase, with a notable, very, very rare exception or two. The utilization of a shuttlecraft was common for most spacefaring civilizations to boldly go, along with transporters. But that's enough waffling. Let's start all the way back at the beginning with the original, the legendary Class F. Active from 2267 through the 2270s, so potential 3 years to a maximum of 12. It ran at 24 feet long with an upper passenger capacity of 7, and it had no armaments, but it did possess shields. Typically, they were based on starbases and sometimes aboard Constitution-class ships. Constructed with a duranium metal shell, the Class F was propelled by an ion engine, which power was generated by matter-antimatter generation. The Class F was divided into two compartments, the forward section, which contained seating for 7 passengers, and the smaller aft, containing access to the engineering components of the shuttle, and which I am now going to permanently label the boot. And if you're not English, you probably don't get that. But bonus points if you do. Though it appeared in several episodes of the original series, a prominently featured episode also alludes to the title The Galileo-7, in which the shuttle, aptly named Galileo, with 7 crew occupants including Spock, Scott, McCoy, Lieutenants Latimer, Gaetano, and Boma, and Yeoman Mears. And I've probably pronounced all of those incorrectly. Even Spock. Shortly after departing the Enterprise, they're quickly blown off course by an electromagnetic phenomenon known as Murasaki 312, which swirls like some angry blight in space, and then they crash land on Taurus 2, home to a tribal culture known as Taurians, which, naturally, want to kill them all. Latimer is skewered by a spear whilst out scouting with Gaetano. After failed attempts by the Enterprise crew to locate and retrieve the shuttle and the away team, the brilliant minds of Spock and Scotty get the shuttle back into orbit, with the survivors, Spock, Scotty, and McCoy, along with Mears and Boma, who were all consequently beamed back to the Enterprise, while their out-of-fuel shuttle broke up in the atmosphere from a rapidly decaying orbit. A precursor to the Class F is the Stamets-Type. Yes, I know, I was going to keep this strictly to the treks I stated a while ago and later cover the Kelvin timeline onward as a sneaky insert, but you know what? Couldn't wait that long to show the amazing shot of the shuttle giving chase to Captain Pike on horseback, with his really great hair and that glorious beard. Why did he not keep the beard? Anyway, that shuttle, piloted by Admiral Robert April, was also called Galileo. Externally, it was very similar to the Class F, could very well just be a revision, with 3 forward windows and a left-hand door allowing for ingress and egress. Again, no weapons, but equipped with a tractor emitter this time, and a basic emergency transporter that could beam up to 1 person or large object at a time. This iteration of the craft was in use between the 2250s and 60s, and while not actually stated in canon, the shuttlecraft could have been named after science officer Paul Stamets. And you know what? Sod it, to me, that is canon now. You're welcome.
Go. Somewhere else, please.
A Type 3 shuttle first appeared in the animated series episode Mud's Passion. At least 3 of these shuttles were hangared aboard the 1701. In 2269, Harcourt Mudd, escaped the Enterprise and stole 1 of the 3 in the shuttle bay, registered NCC 1701/12, while the crew was studying a Class M planet orbiting a binary sun. He also kidnapped Nurse Christine Chapel, because of course he did, intent on stranding her on the surface for the Enterprise crew to rescue her, while he escaped in the shuttle. However, his plan was foiled when a native rock beast crushed the shuttle with one of his feet, like a giant angry toddler murdering a Lego. There was no printed name on the craft, and it was only referred to as shuttlecraft in dialogue. Copernicus, which later appeared in The Slaver Weapon, was presumably a replacement for the 1701-12, as both shared the same registry. Enterprise also carried an Aqua-Shuttle, which could accommodate 2 pilots and an additional crew. The shuttle was equipped with 3 phaser emitters, which is weird because it went underwater a lot. Aqua-Shuttles were multi-purpose vessels, capable of both space and atmospheric flight, traversing across the water in a boat-like fashion and being fully submersible. An independent onboard power pack powered the dual forward and single aft phasers. The first draft for the animated episode The Ambergris Element describes it as shaped like a gleaming projectile. Its cockpit rises above the midsection of the projectile and is encased in a thick transparent material, giving the occupants a view in all directions. The interior? Compact and sturdy. An instrument panel with a built-in tricorder, even a small scanner. The party straps themselves into indentation seats, whatever those are, built into the bulkhead and fit the human body perfectly, offering complete support and protection during activation and landing. And I am no longer sure if we're still talking about seats here. But either way, that is quite a feat of information for an animated shuttle, really, but alas, the fair amount of introduction to the shuttle went into the dialogue, but was ultimately cut from the final draft. A shame. Galileo, however, was popular enough a name for the previous incarnations of shuttlecraft that the embarked shuttles carried by starships such as the USS Enterprise A were named as such, the Galileo-Type. They were so popular, in fact, that they operated between the 2280s and the 2370s, which is amazing for a support ship, but hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Pilana Torres knows what I mean. 6 meters in length, defended with standard deflector shields, the early variant had only a single large front window and stubby wings on the sides after the entry doors, between the nacelles and the thruster pods. Typical of 90% of most Starfleet vessels, it had 2 nacelles attached port and starboard by short pylons. 2 impulse thrusters faced aft, above, and to the side of the rear hatch, 4 maneuvering thrusters located at the corners of the craft as well. The interior featured the tandem forward station in the cockpit, which became a very standard feature very quickly, with a very large display screen between them. In the main cabin, there were 2 rows of inward-facing seats with track lighting beneath them. 3 weapons lockers were located on board, 2 were located on either side just after the side doors, and the 3rd just below the center console in the cockpit. A later variant, known as Type 6, can be seen carried by the 1701D, and also by Voyager. They had additional side cockpit windows, and the stubby wings had been removed. Standard vessels were unarmed, but for special operations, some were equipped with Type 4 forward-phasing phaser emitters. Try saying that 10 times fast. I did, and I failed. 7 of 9, however, didn't care for that noise at all, and somehow had an additional phaser array on hers in the aft. Transporters were also not standard to the Type 6, but could be fitted with a portable array if you gave them half a chance. The control systems were fairly intuitive and could be easily quickly picked up by a non-Federation pilot. The all-time greatest engineer who could give it all she's got whenever and wherever needed, the man out of time, Montgomery Scott, was graciously gifted a Type 6 and simply allowed on his merry way into the vastness of space, following his rescue from his wrecked vessel, the USS Jenolan, inside, or rather outside, of a Dyson sphere. Surely there's protocols following the rescue of a man trapped, frozen in time, on a crashed ship in the middle of nowhere? The Type 15 Shuttlepod. It was carried by Starfleet vessels, a mere compact version of a standard shuttlecraft, and they were only 3.6 meters, that's 11 feet, with no armaments at all. It was not uncommon for them to simply be referred to as shuttlecraft. They were a standard complement on Galaxy, Renaissance, Oberth, and Nebula-class starships, and they remained in service until at least 2381 in some locations, such as Starbase 80. Equipped with 2 millicochran impulse driver nacelles located either side of the craft, and they were both fed by primary and secondary deuterium supplies, power regulated by 3 Sarium Krellide power cells. The magnetic inducers required periodic realignment. In 2365, the crew of the Enterprise D came across an adrift shuttlepod out in space somewhere, where they were the only manned Federation vessel to be out that far. After bringing the pod aboard, they discovered that not only is it exactly the same as the one they've just parked it next to, but it contains none other than legendary Shakespearean actor Sir Patrick Stewart, in full Captain Picard cosplay no less, much to everyone's surprise. Especially Picard's. Type 7 shuttlecraft were a part of standard complements aboard Galaxy, Excelsior, and Nebula classes in the mid to late 24th century. They were a short to medium transport auxiliary craft capable of interstellar travel, while others were restricted to impulse speeds. Typically unarmed and having minimal deflector shield coverage, they were equipped with escape transporters which could be reconfigured for standard use if necessary. And in the center of the cockpit was a large display which gave navigational information and acted as a view screen. Most had interiors very similar to that of the Type 6, because, budgetary constraints. A Type 7 was piloted by Worf and Data in an attempted rescue of the captured Captain Picard aboard the Borg cube, from which they beamed aboard using their escape transporter. The Chaffee-type Shuttlepod was one of my favorites. It was a very small cockpit with room for 4 people, and as usual, unarmed, however, had shields. Carried by the USS Defiant, NX 74205, and likely others of the class, in a ventral access shuttle bay. And for those waiting to comment bomb me, it wasn't my favorite because it was carried by the Defiant, it was my favorite because it looked the cuddliest of all the shuttles. Those engine cowlings made it look adorable, and you know it. The primary power grid was powered by the impulse engines, and this grid made no use of antimatter for this reason, making it capable of entering areas of subspace Metreon radiation that would normally collapse the dilithium matrix of a warp core. Backup power was available in case the impulse power failed, and there were also primary and secondary navigational computers. Unusual for a shuttlepod, the Type 18 had warp capability, another support craft carried by the prototype USS Defiant. In 2371, Shuttle 01 was used by Kira and Odo, following a brutal attack on the Defiant by 3 Jem'Hadar fighters, in which Odo was able to escape into the Omarion Nebula. The Omarion Nebula. In the same year, the subspace field coils of the warp drive of Shuttle 01 were used to create a subspace bubble around the Sword of Stars comet fragments as they passed through the Bajoran wormhole. Type 8 shuttles, introduced in the 2370s, at first glance were very evocative of the Type 6, with a variation to the nacelles and being equipped with 2 forward phasers as standard, along with the shields. These formed the bulk of the near-infinite supply of TARDIS-sized shuttles carried by the USS Voyager, and I suppose the Intrepid class in general. In cases when 7 of 9 piloted one, it was very much interchangeable with the Type 6, depending on the angle you view it from. No, seriously, her ship literally changed models from one shot on stock footage used. The interior was also virtually indistinguishable from the Type 6's. Everyone's favorite, the Class 2, also known as the Type 9 for some reason, was also part of the inventory of the Intrepid class. Although very compact, they were equipped with phaser banks and photon launchers, and built out of the old reliable material known as explodium. As standard, they had a respectable speed of warp 4, and in an extra special plot-required circumstances, they were capable of infinite velocity, aka warp 10, which was never mentioned again. And I mean, never again. The class was also widely used as training ships at Starfleet Academy in the 2360s. According to Tom Paris, they used to shoehorn half a dozen cadets into one of these things for weeks at a time. You did not want to be around when they opened up that airlock. It was also the one and same class that just don't cut it in the Delta Quadrant, effectively being replaced by the Delta Flyer and its replacement 2 years later. Oh, what a fun segue that was to our next shuttle, also carried by the USS Voyager, and you guessed it, it's the Delta Flyer! And as much as I'd love to gush over it again, you can just go and see our complete breakdown video for full details on that. Who knows, maybe our editor will get cheeky and put a link on it right here on the screen while I'm talking like this, thereby making me make an absolute of myself. Wouldn't be the first time. Going for another twofer here, seeing as they shared the same scenes together in Star Trek Insurrection, the Federation mission scout ship and the shuttlecraft Type 11. They could be grouped with the TNG shuttles, seeing as they're from those era of movies, but as Insurrection was released after Voyager had launched across the galaxy, it's landing here. Or docking. I don't know. Speaking of Voyager, the cockpit for the scout ship was actually a redress of the Class 2 shuttle Cochrane built for that show. This made it a single pilot ship with a forward-mounted cockpit separate from the rest of the vessel. Slightly larger in size than the Type 11, at approximately 24 meters in length, a maximum warp speed of warp 5, and in addition to the pilot, it could carry 5 to 10 passengers. It was armed with dual-mounted phaser banks and even photon torpedoes. The vessel is seen to be accessible through a ventral docking hatch as well. Although not named, it did receive a registry of NCC 75227, essentially giving it starship status, like the Danube-class runabouts. The Type 11 was equipped with phaser arrays and aft-launching tachyon bursts, sporting the recurring tandem pilot stations with a view out of a large forward-facing window and 2 side windows and additional seating for 4. A transporter is located at the rear of the cockpit, not unlike the runabout from which the interior was actually modified. That's right, the Danube-class rides again! Ish. Captain Picard and Worf giving chase to Data, the latter who was experiencing a little bit of a malfunction after being shot, who wouldn't, for discovering what the Badmiral Doherty was planning on doing with the planet's inhabitants, the Baku. They successfully docked to the ventral hatch of Data's scout ship, with the distraction of singing A British Tar from the HMS Pinafore by Gilbert and Sullivan.
Sing, Worf, sing.
And Worf was able to deactivate him with a tricorder, like he was a misbehaving Ford Focus or something. I wonder if Worf ever did meet the new crew members to let them know how well their song works to distract a malfunctioning android.
The composer's Worf.
Simply referred to as Argo in dialogue, this shuttle was attached to the Enterprise E in 2379 and itself carried a small 3-person all-terrain attack buggy that was absolutely not a Ford Focus in drag. It's not shown to use weapons or shields, though shielding is usually common, a feature on all shuttle models, so I wouldn't have been surprised. It featured recessed nacelles and fold-down wings designed to aid in atmospheric maneuverability, and the aforementioned buggy was secured in the Argo's rear cargo bay with wheel clamps. The shuttle itself could even be remotely piloted with a control device stored on the buggy. While the shuttles have not been commissioned and attached to any other starships that we're aware of, the buggy is part of the California-class auxiliary vehicle inventory. And now, to bookend the classic 5 Star Trek shows with the epitome of small support craft, the Shuttlepod. Introduced to us as 2 auxiliary pods of the Enterprise NX-01, it was used in the early days of transporter technology, which itself was only deemed safe for goods and equipment, and strictly emergency use only on biomatter, namely living beings. Into these little pods you could uncomfortably cram up to 7 people, including the pilot, who had a tiny viewport. Entry, whilst docked aboard the mothership, was from the dorsal hatch, which could also extend an airlock to transfer to another vessel whilst in the vacuum of space. Planetside, traditionally the side doors were used for entry and exiting the pods. They had a whopping speed of 1/4 impulse, but they could achieve higher speeds with modifications because, of course, we can always expect a ship to exceed its maximum capabilities in a pinch. They were also armed with plasma cannons and spatial charges, and instead of shields, polarized hull plating. The pods sported pop-out wings, something Tom Paris would have been very jealous of, I'm sure, which not only looked awesome, but aided in atmospheric flight, which they were most often used for. In the event that its occupants found themselves stranded in the depths of deep space after having lost their ship and crew in a catastrophic crash, but later discovering all were alive and well, yet still days away, and they could be hours from freezing or suffocating, the impulse drive could be jettisoned and rigged to explode. Quite an explosion, in fact. It could make sensors do something very odd.
I imagine that would make quite an explosion. Maybe even big enough to make that blip do something odd.
Yeah, alright, Malcolm, whatever that means, mate. The Shuttlepods were seen throughout the Series 4 season run, and in the most memorable and beloved Bottle episode to have featured, it's Shuttlepod 1, which not only solidified the friendship of Malcolm Reed and Charles Tucker, but the actors alike.
It was one of the highlights of my career doing this episode with you, pal.
Starfleet Command also used Shuttlepods that differed from the ones carried by the NX-class starships. They had blue and silver streamlines and a registry number, such as the one seen in 2154 with NC05. And as we bring this one to a close, we'll sure to be back soon to cover shuttles from the Kelvin timeline, Discovery, Picard, Lower Decks, Prodigy, and Strange New Worlds. But in the meantime, please do keep letting us know of other ships, Starfleet or otherwise, or something else entirely. Come on, let's have a challenge. I am still very curious about the Phasarius. How about you? If you want to keep up to date on all the latest Star Trek news, lore, and more, then make sure to hit that subscribe button to never miss a video from the team here at Trek Central, and you can follow us on social media or join our community Discord server. But for now, I've been Lieutenant Commander Adam. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Live long and prosper, my friends.